Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really interested in the Krays, check out our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London. A direct link for the group is in the YouTube description section. We're a friendly and moderated group which has been running since January 2018. Come and give us a try sometime.
The beginning of the end for me and Reg probably started at Christmas 1967. We had a good Christmas, but we didn't realise that Nipper Reed had been to see Billy Exley. Reed was a superintendent working from the murder squad at the yard. We knew about him, but we never thought he was anything special. We still don't. Exley, the man he saw, was an ex-boxer who did odd jobs for us. He wasn't an important member of the firm, but he knew bits and pieces. We know now that he and Reed met at Exley's little flat in Woodseer Street in the East End, although Exley wouldn't come clean till later. In his book, Reed said, "Once Billy Exley began to talk to me, so many pieces of the jigsaw began to fall into place, and I learned that Jack the Hat McVitie and Billy Exley were sent to shoot Payne." During the first 4 months of 1968, Reed and the policemen working with him, Frank Cater, Harry Mooney, Algie Hemingway and Alan Wright, got at Liza, the nightclub hostess we'd paid to keep Frank Mitchell company at Lenny Dunn's flat. She grasped, and so did Dunn. Then they talked to the barmaid at the Blind Beggar, and she named me as the man who shot George Cornell. She didn't pick me out at the identification parade after Cornell was shot. She walked straight past me, but she picked me out in the trial at the Old Bailey. That can't be right. What's the point of identification parades in the first place if a witness can't pick you out then? How can the same witness suddenly point you out in court months, years later? I tried to say that in court, to say how unfair, how biased it was, but they whitewashed it all. They had finally come for us on the 8th of May in 1968. It's funny really, because after all the bad times I'd been through with my mental problems, I'd been starting to feel a lot better, much more like my old self, and Reg was in good form too. The night they came for us had been the kind of night we always enjoyed. A few drinks at the pub with some of the firm, then up the West End for some action at the clubs. We went to the Astor Club off Berkeley Square and we sat there drinking and talking till the early hours. We never thought anything was up. We knew there were some plainclothes detectives in the club. We could always spot them a mile off, but that was nothing unusual. They were always following us about. Me and Reg eventually left the Astor and drove back to the flat where we lived, at Braithwaite House in Old Street. He was with a girl, I had a fella with me. We all had a nightcap and went to bed. We were all sound asleep when there was a hell of a commotion. I woke up to find my bed surrounded by police, some of them armed. They were led by Nipper Reed, and they'd smashed down the front door to get in. I noticed they were carrying .45 caliber Webley pistols, and one of them was holding an iron bar. Reed said to me, "You are under arrest. Get out of bed with your hands in the air." I was stark naked, but that made no difference to them. Reg was brought into the room, and Reed said we were being charged with murder and other offences. He asked us if we'd got anything to say, and Reg said, "Yes, Mr. Reed. We've been expecting a frame-up for a long time, but we've got plenty of witnesses. There's a lot of people wanting to help us." At the time, we believed that. We knew we had a bit of trouble here, but we didn't think it was anything we couldn't handle. We'd been pulled in before and managed to sort it out. What we didn't realise was that while we were being arrested, squads of armed police were smashing down other doors all over the East End and pulling in anyone they could find. There was something like 18 arrests that night, all carried out at the same moment, and all of those arrested were kept well apart so that no one knew what was going on. They pulled in everyone that night except Scotch Jack Dixon and my right-hand man, Ian Barry. They arrested Dixon a few hours later, and they picked up Ian Barry the next day in a pub in the East End. We were all sent to different prisons, and Reed started to work on the weak ones, the liars, the traitors, and the grasses. The ones he could do a deal with so they could save their own skins. By the middle of June, we were getting whispers that the grassing had started. In his book, Reed says, "I saw Cornelius Whitehead in the chapel at Wandsworth Prison on the 22nd of June. The next day, it was back to Wandsworth Prison in the evening to visit Tommy Cowley, who also wanted to see me. He had been charged with 2 cases of conspiracy to murder and with harbouring Frank Mitchell. 4 days after that, I had a message that Scotch Jack Dixon had asked to see me. I saw him that evening in the chapel, in a meeting which lasted some 25 minutes, and ended with him saying, 'For Christ's sake, don't let anyone know that you've seen me. I'd be dead, you know that, being here talking to you.' What he did not know was that he had become only one of a number who had the same fears. All through that long, wet summer of '68, with me and Reg locked up in isolation, many members of our firm turned Judas. Reed would visit them in prison, using false names and often in disguise, and in the privacy of hospital rooms, chapels and toilets, they would tell their stories. We knew that Albert Donahue had had several sessions with Reed, so had Dixon and Ronnie Hart, our cousin. Dixon was a disgrace. He even had the audacity to say in court, "The murders have got to stop." If Ronnie Kray had not been charged with Cornell's murder, there would have been 2 other murders that I know of that would have been committed. He also said, "Someone has got to have the guts to come forward to say their piece. You have got the 3 of them, me, Reg and our brother Charlie, in the dock." Dixon was a rat. There is no other word for him. Eventually, the trial got underway, and every day was like a fucking carnival as the prisoners were driven in from Brixton, Wandsworth, and other prisons. Me and Reg were driven in from Brixton with a cavalcade of police and prison vehicles, flashing lights, wailing klaxons, armed police and commandos. Each day the route was changed to avoid, they said, any attempt to hijack us. All the way into the Old Bailey, the route was lined with hundreds of people, many of them waving at us. At times it was like the coronation or an execution. There were many charges against us, some of them quite stupid. They were just chucking everything at us, knowing that some of it would have to stick. It was pathetic. More than that, it was corrupt. As long as they could put us away for as long as possible, that was all they cared about. They charged me and Ian Barry with the murder of George Cornell in The Blind Beggar. Barry was one of the few members of the firm to stay loyal. Ian Barry was a real man. He remained loyal to us despite the tremendous pressures put on him by the police. His fellow Scott Dixon stood up in court and said he thought Barry was wrong to stand in the dock, thinking it was big to be convicted with Ronnie Kray about a murder which he had known nothing about previously and in which he had no concern. Reg was charged with being an accessory to Cornell's murder. Both of us, with Tony and Chris Lambrianeau, Ron Bender and Anthony Barry, the co-owner of the Regency Club, were charged with the murder of Jack McVitie. Barry had not been present at the murder and was subsequently acquitted. He too gave evidence against us. Me and Reg and Tommy Cowley, one of the first of the traitors to ask to see Nipper Reid, and our old friend Dickie Morgan were also charged with conspiring to kill a Maltese fella, George Caruana, between January and May 1968. This shows the depths to which the police were sinking to make sure something stuck against the Krays. They said we hired a fella called Paul Elvey to kill Caruana because he was trying to muscle in on our business. They claimed Elvey would have used either a crossbow or an explosive device to kill Caruana. The whole thing was nonsense. Me and Reg and Cowley were also charged with conspiring to murder an unnamed man in 1967, again using Paul Elvey as the hitman, only this time Elvey was to use a hypodermic syringe filled with poison and built into a suitcase. The prosecution claimed that the syringe was designed to work when the case was swung against the body of the intended victim. Death would be instant, but would take the appearance of a heart attack. I had never heard anything like it, and the charges went on and on. I was charged with causing grievous bodily harm to a man at Esmeralda's barn. The prosecution alleged that after he had upset a friend of ours, I invited him to the club and then placed a red-hot poker on his face and shoulders. With Reg and our brother Charlie, I was charged with demanding money with menaces from two of our financial advisors, who were now two of the prosecution's chief witnesses, but who had in their time swindled thousands out of me and Reg. Me and Reggie, with Connie Whitehead and Albert Donoghue, were charged with murdering Frank Mitchell. We were also charged with aiding Mitchell's escape from Dartmoor, and there was a whole string of fraud charges as well. All in all, the police were determined they were going to get us on something. Defending us, we had some top men: John Platts-Mills, QC for me, Paul Wrightson, QC for Reg, and Desmond Vowden, QC for Charlie. On the opening day of the trial, we got more media coverage than Earl Ray, the man who shot Martin Luther King and who had been arrested at London Airport. There were 9 of us in the dock, and Melford Stevenson started that nonsense about us wearing numbered cards around our necks. I soon told him to fuck off. The court was packed every day. In his book My Manor, Charlie Richardson spoke sneeringly about the little grey people who queued up to get into the court when he and his gang faced their torture trial charges. But ours was a more star-studded affair. We had plenty of star names watching us in court, including Charlton Heston, and tickets for the trial were changing hands for big money on the black market. Touts were even outside the Old Bailey buying and flogging tickets. But as the trial went on, I realized we were in deep trouble. One by one, trusted members of our firm took their place in the witness box. I'll never forget Dixon and what he said, but it was when I saw the barmaid from the Beggars that I knew it was all over. The barmaid, who they called Mrs. X, was taken through her evidence by Kenneth Jones, QC. He got her to tell the jury how she was working in the Blind Beggar on the night Cornell was shot, and how she had witnessed the murder. Then came her big moment. Would she, asked Mr. Jones, look around the court and point to the man she had seen shoot Cornell? Straight away, she pointed at me. "Number 1, over there, Ronald Kray," she said, as clear as that. And this was the woman who had failed to pick me out face to face in an identification parade. Shortly after she picked out Ian Barry as the man who was with me, Nipper Reid said later, "It was at this moment I believed justice was going to be done." I didn't feel they played fair, using the barmaid the way they did, but I never felt violent or angry towards her. Funnily enough, I felt a bit sorry for her. Later, I had to give evidence. Reid wrote about that. As he climbed the steps of the witness box, the jury had an even closer look at him. They must have noticed that he looked bigger than he did when he was seated in the dock, and they probably felt, as most people did, that he carried an air of menace with him. Mr. Platts-Mills questioned me about the Cornell killing, which, of course, I denied. I also told him the truth. A few days before Cornell was murdered, I had sent a box of chocolates to his son, who was in hospital. After that, it was just a succession of traitors, grasses, and liars. I had studied the jury, and I knew there was no chance we would get a result. They had been hand-picked, and not by us. Finally, after 38 days, the 12 members of the jury retired to consider their verdict. We went down to the cells to wait. We had lived well during the trial. We had eaten and drunk well, and fresh clothing had been brought to us every day. But we knew that all that was going to change. We were tense. We weren't scared. We were just tense. After 7 hours, we were told they were ready. We were brought up one by one for sentencing. I was the first. The judge, Melford Stevenson, was wearing scarlet robes, and he had a black cap on the bench alongside him. The same black cap, I thought, which would have once been used to sentence men to death. He looked at me and said, "I am not going to waste words on you. In my view, society has earned a rest from your activities." He repeated the charges against me, and the verdicts. Guilty, of course. Then he sentenced me to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure for a minimum of 30 years. It took 16 minutes. In the time it would take to drink a nice glass of gin and tonic, he had thrown away the rest of my active life. It was gone. It was a fucking outrage. Reg got 30 years minimum for the killing of McVitie. Charlie got 10 years for allegedly disposing of McVitie's body. The judge said to him, "It may well be that you are not an active member of the firm, but I am satisfied that you were an active helper in the dreadful enterprise of concealing the traces of the murder that your brothers committed. Tony and Chris Lambrianou got 15 years, Ron Bender got 20 years, Connie Whitehead got 7 years. Freddie Foreman, who was never a member of our firm, got 10 years for being an accessory to the McVitie killing, and Albert Donahue got 2 years. Donahue got away lightly after pleading guilty to being an accessory, but then he had given the police a lot of help. On Tuesday, 4th of March, the 39th day of the trial, Anthony Barry was acquitted and discharged. Nipper Reid's other informers, including Ronnie Hart, got away without being charged. Melford Stevenson then said, "The debt the public owes to Superintendent Reid and his officers cannot be overstated and can never be discharged." Sadly for Nipper, not all of his colleagues felt the same way. In his autobiography he wrote, "As the success of the operation became more apparent, feeling on the 5th floor changed to positive resentment that it was unable to share the story. This was not unusual. The same thing had happened in the Richardson case when every effort had been made to steer the limelight away from Jerry MacArthur, the real author of its success. It was apparent that success in a major investigation such as his and mine is not the best way to further a career. As I learned, it can be distinctly detrimental. Nipper should have thought about that before he started. But it still wasn't over for us. 3 of us, me, Reg and Freddie Foreman, had to face a new trial in the case of Frank Mitchell. We had a new judge, Mr. Justice Lawton, and a new jury. It was a pointless and costly exercise. At the end of it all, after another 20 days, I was found not guilty of the murder of Mitchell. Reg got 5 years to run concurrently with his life sentence for murder for freeing Frank from Dartmoor, and another 9 months also to run concurrently for harbouring him. Freddie Foreman, whom the prosecution claimed had actually shot Frank Mitchell dead, was found not guilty. By the 25th of May, it was all over. It had taken 2 trials, lasting 63 days, plus the huge costs of the investigation, the protection of the witnesses and the jury, hundreds of policemen, and some of the best legal brains in the country, just to put a handful of villains behind bars. 2 of them, me and Reg, for at least 30 years. And others, like Ian Barry, who had never killed anyone, for the best part of their active lives. What Melford Stevenson did was inhuman, and I am not the only person to think so. Shortly after the trial, Professor Leon Radzinwich, Britain's leading authority at that time on long-term prison sentences, wrote in the Sunday Times, "Society owes long-term prisoners something more than death in small doses." And Lord Soper, the Methodist leader, said, 30 years is more horrible than hanging. The procedure of putting the Krays away and allowing them to rot is a more horrible fate than the quickness of a rope. He added, long-term prison sentences are an admission of failure. There has to be a ray of hope left for every man, whatever he has done. Una Paddle of the Prison Reform Trust said, it was the high emotion surrounding the Kray case that led to such harsh sentences. On Wednesday, the 28th of May, 3 days after the end of the trial, they began to disperse us. They sent us to prisons around the country because Reed thought it was vital for security reasons that we were split up. Me and Charlie went to Durham but were separated the moment we got there. Reg went to Parkhurst, Freddie Foreman went to Leicester, Connie Whitehead went to Hull, and so on. And that brings us to the end of this edition. In the next part, I'll be discussing our life behind bars and the battle to survive in the prison system. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.